I'm Laura Post, and I'm a voice actress. I've done characters in anime like Rosalia in Sword Art Online, Red's mom in Marowak in Pokemon Origins, Cindy Campbell in Squid Girl, Bos Bos in Redline, etc. And video games is probably what I'm more known for, and that's I'm Ari in League of Legends, I'm Valentine in Skullgirls, I'm Arrow in Firefall, I'm Olivia in Bravely Default, and I do voices in Lightning Returns and PlanetSide 2 and a dozen other things. So that's me. Next.
My name is Lisle Wilkerson. I am tissue provider, aka I do a lot of voice work for video games. Most of my work was done in Tokyo, Japan, because I grew up there. So I've been there for I'm not going to give my age, so I'll just say over 20 years. But I do a lot of work for like Tekken. I do Nina Williams, Christy Montero, Zafina. Also Virtua Fighter. I do Sarah Bryant and Street Fighter versus Tekken, Dead or Alive, just like a lot of Shenmue, Crazy Taxi. So I've been doing it for a very long time, hence the Crazy Taxi reference. But yeah, so and I do some of my voice work. I'll do in English and Japanese. So stuff like Batsmaru, Hello Kitty's mischievous little friend. I do his voice. I've done his voice for a few projects, and yeah, and then lost in translation, and so I do like on-camera stuff as well, but that's my voice work.
I'm Rei Goldstein, and I don't normally sound like this. Denver is a little too high in the altitude for me. Personally, I'm a voice actress and an on-camera actress. Voiceover-wise, I've done anime, Back to Paradise Kiss, Eureka 7, Nanoha, Tweeny Witches. More recently, I'm in the new season of Ikitosen, or I think it's called Battle Vixens in the U.S. I'm in the new season that is released in like 2 weeks. The villain in that show. Also, I've been in video games, done voice work for video games like PlanetSide, Air Tenelico, Imagine in the Forsaken Kingdom. I also work a lot on camera. I've done a lot of short films and feature-length films that have done the festival runs. Also working a little more in TV right now, but can't talk about that yet. So I'm kind of all over the place personally.
You guys have any questions?
I guess this one's for Laura, and the others if you want to chime in. What would be your dream character, I would say? Like, what would be a part of a project that you would die to be a part of?
I would consider my life complete if I got to voice Barbara Gordon. She could be Oracle, Batgirl, before being Batgirl. I don't really care what point in her life we are at, but Barbara Gordon is my favorite character of all time. Batman the Animated Series was one of the big reasons I wanted to get into voiceover when I was a teenager, as opposed to when I was a kid. But yeah, I love Batman, and I love Batgirl Barbara Gordon version. She's just such a cool character and like a super self-made hero. Like, she's like Batman if Batman didn't have money. Like, that's how I'm like, oh, she's so cool. So yeah, I would love to voice Barbara Gordon one day. That would be the dream.
I don't know if I have a dream character. I mean, I do have this anime that I don't think has ever been done in the States, from what I know. It's like from the 70s, so I grew up with this anime, and it was so important in my life to the point where one of the main characters, when he died on a horse riding accident, I was so depressed I didn't want to go to school for a week. So I was like really like affected by this. But it's called Candy, and I absolutely to this day like love that show. At AX last year, one of the guy who played Anthony was there.
Is that the guy that died on the?
Yeah, on the show.
Because I was gonna say, was it the actor or because like I don't know the show at all. Sorry.
Yeah.
So he was there,
and he was there, and I bum rushed him, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, Anthony!" And he was like, "Why is this tall blonde American coming up to me? Like, what are you doing?" It was like a total fangirl experience, and I rarely have one of those. So I would love to do something with that, just because it's so important to kind of my growth. Yes.
I kind of feel like I have to make certain distinctions. There are certain characters that I would love to play in voiceover as opposed to on camera. Voiceover, fictional character, I would love to play Sadako from the Ring series. I've had an obsession with her ever since I first saw the Japanese Ring movies. If it's a historical character, I also have a very unhealthy obsession with Mata Hari, the spy from World War One. World War One. She's just amazing. She is like the earliest ever I've heard of someone who really embraced her femininity and her female sexuality in a positive way. If we're talking on camera, I would love. This is like a dream project. And actually, there's a little more behind it, but I will leave that out. I would love to play Christine Jorgensen on camera. I think she's such an amazing woman, and I would love to delve into kind of the mentality of her, of what it was like to be her at the time that she lived.
Can I ask you, who is Christine Jorgensen? I don't know.
Christine Jorgensen is actually the first woman to come into the mainstream who actually went through transgender transition in Europe and came back to the U.S. She was known for left the U.S. as a man and came back as a woman. And it's a little more complicated than that. And some of the ways we refer to her nowadays aren't acceptable to refer to people nowadays. But it's really interesting for her at the time because it was such an explosion in the media when she stepped off that plane from Europe back in the late 1950s.
Very
cool. Why don't you tell us about how you got into the career you're pursuing now?
Okay. I sort of touched on this a little. I wanted to do voiceover when I was 6. I was really, really blown away by Rob Paulson, who was Raphael in the Ninja Turtles. And then he was also Mighty Max on Mighty Max. So I was like, oh my God, that's like one guy and he's like 2 characters and shows I like. That's so cool. And I want to do that. And like, I've always been like that since I was a little kid, like pointing out voices and stuff. My parents were watching an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, and I was watching it too, and there's this random one episode character that's a time traveler, and I'm like, that's Chaos from Aladdin the Animated Series. And my mom's like, what? I'm like, it's this cat on Aladdin, and that's his voice. I can tell. And my mom was just like, okay, cool. So I've always been a huge fan of animation and a huge fan of voice acting. But, I was a kid. My mom was the furthest thing on the planet from a stage mom. Not that she's not supportive, but she was just like, you can wait until you're an adult to get into that world with agents and things like that, which I did. I moved away from it for a while in high school, but I did theater and I was always singing. And then I went to an anime convention when I was 19. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at all these panels on voice acting. That's like what I wanted to do when I was a kid. I should just go and check them out. And after going to like 3 panels, I pretty much had changed my entire life course and was going to be a voice actress. So I studied in Chicago. And then after I finished college in Chicago, I moved out to LA and pursued it there. And I'm still doggedly pursuing it. But I am, I'm living the dream in that I'm making a living. Woohoo! So, yeah, that's sort of my short version.
With me, I got into it because of radio. So I started out in radio at 19. So ever since I was like 3 years old or so, music was always the biggest, just everything to me. And so I was very much into radio. And I just remember at an early age, when I would save my money, I would save it to buy records, like Donna Summer, like this really dates me down. on the radio, volume 1 and 2, like that was a huge deal for me, or Billy Joel, and I used to always listen to Wolfman Jack and Charlie Tuna, and because they would a lot of times be on weeknights or even on Sunday, and I wasn't allowed to listen to the radio on Sunday because I was in a Christian home. So I would have to sneakily like tape it, like steal cassette tapes from my mom and dad, and that's kind of how I got into radio. And then with radio came voice acting. So it was kind of something that really I fell into, but when I discovered it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot, in some ways, very similar to radio, where you get to create a world with your voice, and you get to express yourself. It's so fascinating and so interesting to me, and so that's how I got into it.
For me, it's kind of been a lot of things coming together. Personally, I got into anime when I was in college, and the emotional depth that I saw in characters in anime just led me to realize that this is more than just, cartoons. These are actual people with actual emotions that are a lot more complex than black and white. And through that, I started going to anime conventions, and I remember in 2002, I met a voice actress at an anime convention, and I told her that I was thinking about doing voiceover, and she told me, you have a very interesting voice. I can totally see you doing it, but just remember, voice acting is primarily acting. Do that first, then worry about voice acting. And then from there, I started taking acting classes in college and doing theater, and graduated. And then around the time I graduated, I at the time, AX Anime Expo was doing the AX Idol competition. It was just starting, and I won that in 2005. And through that, I got my first couple auditions. And through that, I moved to LA, and from there was kind of snowballed. It's just I started meeting people. I started taking classes with people, did my demo, got an agent, and kind of just played it by ear ever since, because you really can't plan certain things.
Amen, sister.
How were you guys approached for your more defining character roles? Because you were mute in Artanelico, and you are part of one of the biggest online video games currently. You're Ari in League. And then you're in tons of characters and fighting games that are still played today, even in the game room on the other cross people are playing it. So how are you guys approached for these roles in video games specifically?
You mean besides threatening people? Just kidding.
Pretty straightforward for me. I'm gonna guess this is actually gonna be the same. This is gonna go a lot. You get an audition. It was just, hey, this character is a sexy character. We know you do sexy characters, so we're sending this to you, as well as, 25, 50, who knows how many other women that do sexy voices, and give us what you got. I've actually auditioned before Ari. I had auditioned for a number of other League characters. And I know that there are other people in League that had auditioned for other League characters as well. So, I was familiar with the game for sure. And but Ari, it had 2 rounds. The first one, they were like Jessica Rabbit, really deep, really sinister, sexy. And, I gave them one of those. And then they did a second round because they were like, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't have said Jessica Rabbit. Maybe we shouldn't have said quite that deep because we don't want her that deep. So then I did 2 takes. I did one that was still kind of like what they were asking for, that was much deeper and much more like Valentine and that other thing that I do. And then, I looked at the art and I looked at the description, and I just felt like she was kind of playful and flirty and evil because she sucks souls, but flirty. So I sort of did what ended up booking the job, which was the Ari we all know, that was, they've exhausted their use, was the line that they really liked. It was just sort of this sort of flippant, I'm done with them. Whatever. Don't care. So, and then that's what ended up booking the role, and it was fun times had by all.
Probably for me, the only real, it's usually by audition. And in Japan, it's interesting because they don't have home studios a lot of times. So that's a huge difference, because here in the States nowadays, people send their audition, bits from home, like they record them in home. So usually what we have to do is we have, and there's also no there's no unions, and it's a very kind of different system. So I would work with like 4 or 5 agencies that some were specialized in on camera, others specialized in voiceover, and especially with the Tekken and with the Virtua Fighter stuff, and with Shenmue actually, that was all brought on by the same agency that does a lot of voice work. So they had a sample of my tape, or a voice sample, and then they sent it to the client, and then the client would be like, okay, we want to audition so, and then we would go in for like a live audition. So a lot more of that still exists in Japan, but now I think they're finally starting to get into, but there's no space for a home studio, well, even though you can make it a small one, but yeah, so that's kind of.
They do sometimes still do that in America. I had a situation like that just this past week before I came here. Yeah, where it was, okay, thanks for sending us those demos that you sent us. We want to hear at these times on this day at this studio. But it's really rare.
Personally, again, like everybody else has said, most of it is through auditions. You'll get sent something, or your agent or the studio will think you're right for it. It's like, okay, try it out. It's funny that you mentioned mute specifically, because I actually didn't audition for that. They hired me off the spot because the client had heard something that I'd done previously and really liked it, because they were looking for something very specific in that. They wanted a girl, and because they wanted someone who had a feminine tone, but could still give it a very testosterone-y feel, because of that character has a very specific physicality, but she has a very specific reality too. And they specifically told me too that, because I listened to the reference, and if you know who plays it in the original, it's the voice actress who plays Pikachu in Pokemon. So that's what I kept hearing, and every line they would tell me, listen to it, but that's not what we want. We want to get more of her brazen, the very much testosterone filled, like, I'm about to beat you up, yet still have a feminine edge to her. And that is something very specific that they knew that they weren't going to get a lot of people who could do it, and they knew that I could do it. And specifically, you hear it in certain tones. Like, I think there are certain places where mute becomes very coquettish and has a love interest, and she becomes very coquettish, but she still has that very deep brazen voice at the end of it with those sing-songy words. So it was a very specific thing that they were looking for, that they found that only I could provide in that case.
And jobs like that are great. You don't have to audition.
You actually touched on what my next question was going to be, the home studios and how it's affecting the industry. I was wondering how it's different, like the video game industry versus anime, whether one side's more towards one and the other. So I know in like video games you have a lot more takes and a lot more little short,
Okay. So like for auditioning, or for how the sessions go?
How the actual like recordings would go?
I'd still say most of this, when you actually have booked a job, it's usually still from a studio, and in that way it's still pretty similar. I have done video games from home studios. Lord of the Rings Online was from a home studio. Heroes of New Earth was from a home studio. So, a couple games where that's what it sounds like in the home studio. But still, usually you go in someplace and you record. But I don't know, difference in the experience in the booth between doing video games and anime. I mean, video games, you have more freedom, just because anime, you have to match those lip flaps. So you're restricted. I was doing something recently, and it was a very emotional scene, and I really wanted to pause at this one point. But even though it was a mouth not seen line, which means that I'm off camera, so I get more freedom than you normally do in anime, I still didn't have enough time to pause. So I had to just limit it and not pause there and keep going. But so in that way I kind of prefer video games, but they can be very vocally stressful.
Mm-hmm. And physically sometimes you get really, especially with the fighting games, like sometimes you just have to kind of really move your body like a crazy person
if you want
to get to that place.
If you want to get good fight sounds, you're usually like, you're fake punching, and you hope you don't hit the mic or the stand or anything, And same thing with getting hit, you're actually like physically, you get punched in the stomach, you go, because you can hear the difference between someone that's not doing it and someone that actually gets physical for those sounds.
To me specifically, I've never done video games or anime or animation, not in a studio. The auditions, yes, you do it all in your home studio. And it's very, very different. It depends on agencies, it depends on studios. Sometimes they really want you to come in. And personally, ever since I started getting more into on camera and getting used to actually going places for an audition and getting direction, I get a lot more apprehensive about doing things at home when I can actually go to a studio and get direction, because I love that experience more, because I might have an idea of what they want, but that might not necessarily be accurate. They might want something very specific, and they're not giving it to you when you're recording it from home. But as to, the actual sessions, the only stuff that I've personally recorded from home is like IVRs, phone stuff, and educational material. That's pretty much the only thing I've done for my home studio. And honestly, in LA, for voiceover, for the big markets, you do have to have a home studio for auditions, because most agencies, unless you're with like a really big agency, they won't have a booth at the agency for you to go in and record all the time. They want you to send in MP3s.
And even the really big agencies, because of the internet, turnaround times on auditions have gotten faster and faster, where it's literally like, hey, can you get this to us in 40 minutes? And you have a reference file and you have all this stuff you have to do. You still got to get it in 40 minutes. There's not time to drive from wherever you are to your agent's office and then get in and like book a time and be directed. You have to just, because they need to get it to the client in an hour, which is why you have to get it in 45 minutes. And it's the same thing in like the promo world. Things have moved so fast that like a lot of the things you hear on TV and stuff are actually from people's home studios, ISDN, because they want it like, hey, we have a new promo and we need you to do it in 5 minutes. And it's like, okay, and you're pretty much stuck at your homebound during like office hours, because the turnaround is just so fast in that world nowadays. Like, I mean, it used to be fast in that it was like, oh man, they'd call you up and you needed to be at the studio in an hour. And nowadays it can be as bad as, like we need, 15 minutes. You need to be ready to go, hooked up to ISDN, connected to the clients, and doing the script. So, yeah.
And I think also
technology.
Like with one of the biggest reasons, because thinking about like probably one of the biggest reasons they don't usually use a home studio is, especially say with like an anime or like a video game, it's really hard to control like the background. I mean, like the sound just won't match, and that's a huge
people are using
issue.
different mics and stuff that won't sound
so for
like
the control value, like you have to have everything usually in the same studio.
Yeah.
However, I will also say I've been in some studios. I'm like, really? How can you call this a studio? And I've recorded stuff like the GPS. I've done voices for GPS, and it was like literally like in a closet kind of situation. It was terrible on so many different levels. But so.
And in regards to doing auditions from home, I think I actually I like getting direction, but I think it's good that people can do auditions from home, because I feel like more people get to be heard that way. Because if you're holding auditions traditionally, there's only so many hours in the day. If you're, going, hey, here's this audition, send us back your top, 15, the agency can have 20, 25 people audition and then take the top 10, 15 and send them to the client. So more people get an opportunity. Because you're not confined by booth reservations and scheduling and stuff. So I like that too. But it is hard because you have to self-direct, which is just another thing to add on top of everything else.
All right. All of you have voiced different characters from different genres. Like Laura, you've voiced Ari from MOBA, and you've voiced like a baker in a Japanese RPG and tons of fighting game characters, and you've done live action and animation. Like, how do you approach each genre? Is it really, how difficult would you say to go from like a fighting game or to a very emotional anime?
Excuse me. I find being a nerd really helps me in auditions for things, because I'll get an audition for a game and I'll be like, this is a MOBA. So I know that how these lines are going to be used. Like, I know I'm not necessarily talking to another character. I'm talking to the player. I'm being clicked on, and I'm talking to the player who's clicking on me. especially when MOBAs were kind of newer and people didn't know what these lines were, it was really nice to sort of have that like nerd context. Same thing for doing an MMO when you're auditioning for an NPC, you know that people might hear this line a million times, so you don't want it to be too annoying, or things like that. But acting is acting, so I don't feel like it's a huge difference in approach doing like that. There's certain styles, things like, when you're doing an anime, you're going to be doing things like, or, that happens a lot in anime and not as much in, like a Western thing necessarily. But even so, like, those are just tiny little tweaks. Acting-wise, it feels the same because you're doing all of the same work. You're asking yourself these questions to put yourself in the right headspace and create this, like, secondary reality that you're then going to go and present to the world through your voice. So,
yeah, kind of in the same vein of what Laura was saying. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that it's really based on that project, no matter what project it is. And I think more than anything, it's just the matter of committing to that, like, full-heartedly, So if you go into it, like, no matter what, and there's some times where I've not really gotten along well or not really kind of liked the director I was working with, but at the end of the day, like, I was committed to the project. So I just, like, for me, and I'm also a very kind of passionate person, so I just, like, throw myself into things usually, yeah, always. So that's kind of how I approach it, I think.
I think the biggest thing for me was adjusting to on camera when I started doing that a couple years ago, because you're taught in voiceover to be very broad, very big, because that essentially you're getting animated to for the most part. You really have to develop everything just with your voice. So a lot of the notes that I got in my first time doing on camera was, hey Julie, you're up here, we need you down here, because the camera is on you. The camera can see every little facial tick you make. And even though in voiceover, you would have to go like this, like this, or very broad to get a sound out, in camera, just doing this is picked up. So that was the biggest adjustment for me. And I'll really actually have to do a mental note whenever I'm going from one medium to another in a very short amount of time. It's like, okay, I'm going into animation. Okay, I can actually let loose, and I actually prepare with music, and I listen to specific music depending on the project. Specifically and on camera stuff, it's more quiet stuff and stuff that brings me in, that makes it a little more introspective. In voiceover, I'll listen to something very energetic, something that actually gets me really active. So that's been the biggest kind of differentiation for me personally.
Have you been enjoying Anime Land Wasabi?
Yeah, it's fun. I love conventions. I love hanging out with fellow voice actors and meeting the fans and everything like that. So yeah,
Yes, ditto, yeah.
Been a good time.
I think
I played some Dance Central. That's my jam, my video game jam.
most of us were fans before we even got into the industry, so it's like we've been doing conventions coming, since the late, I'm going to date myself, early 2000s as attendees. And so now we get to actually see it from like a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
And you start enjoying different things depending on where you're coming from. And it's like there are a couple times when during the convention I'll be like, you know what, I just want to be an attendee right now and go to the dealer's room and look at stuff, or, play Dance Central and go to the video game room and just chill. And then other times it's like, well, hey, we want to socialize. And so it's always enjoyable. It's like you never really have a bad experience when you enjoy the people that you're hanging around with, which is the point of a convention.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I was here 2 years ago, and so it's so great to see so many familiar faces, like in staff and in congoers. So that's just really cool. Yeah. And then working, because we all, sometimes the only time that we all see each other can be at
conventions, yeah.
And so it's so wonderful to, and we've just, the cast this year, the VAs has just been so awesome. We've had such a great time together, and so, yeah, it's been great, yeah.
Do you guys like play the video games or watch the anime that you're in? Like, do you watch like the final products and you play the games after everything is done?
I sure do. I'm currently playing Bravely Default. I just finished everything with Anchime, so now we're gonna go try to get to Florum. That's where I am right now. Hopefully, on the plane ride back, I will have gotten to Florum. I like, as you know, before I started voice acting, I was already like playing video games all the time and watching animation, both Western and anime. So I didn't really stop, and I still watch anime now, like even stuff I'm not in. So like, you know, I watched Attack on Titan while it was coming out from Japan, and same thing with Sword Art Online, which was really cool when I got to be in it. I was like, oh my god, I love Sword Art Online. Yeah, I'm gonna audition for this. But yeah, so it's sort of, I am an unashamed nerd of all things.
Yeah, I actually have a panel where I play Tekken against fans. However, I didn't really play very many video games growing up, so I am like the worst button masher.
I'm not good either. Just because I play them does not mean I'm good at them.
However, I will say I do win sometimes. Yes. And then there are times where it actually goes back to restart, or who knows what I've done. I'm like, help, you know, but yeah, and that is actually one of my favorite panels, because the only thing I know how to do is talk smack in my character, and I start even before they're given their, you know, their little joystick things. So I'm like, yeah, come on, baby, show me what you got. You know? I'm like all in it, and they're like, ooh. So yeah, for me, I do, yeah. But my first one, I had a date one. This is how I first heard Crazy Taxi. I'll go ahead and throw this in. I was on a date with a guy, and this was in Tokyo, and he was a big gamer. So we went to this arcade that he loved going to. He's like, yeah, I really like this new game that's coming out, that's just come out. Like, let's go, you know. And I was like, okay, cool. And I'm listening to him like, oh, that voice sounds really familiar. Like, not. And then finally I was like, it's me. Let's leave. I was like so freaked out by it. I think that was actually the first time that I got to hear, because we're never, like, I don't know how it is here in the States, we're never given nothing. We're not given our work. So a lot of times we do.
Sometimes you are here, but
it's kind of hit or miss.
Yeah, it sort of just depends on the company and the day. And
yeah, so we don't get to hear a lot of times our work, you know. So that was a funny experience. I was like, oh my gosh, that was so weird. Yeah.
Personally, I've always been a big gamer. I wish I had more time to play video games, and then I could actually get through all the games that I'm in, but unfortunately I don't. And I got into Star Wars The Old Republic recently, and that takes up most of my gaming time, because I'm in a guild that still raids regularly. It's like, how does that happen? So if I had more free time, I definitely would, but unfortunately I'm running around so much on a weekly basis that it's like, you know, if it's not portable, usually I'm not playing it on a regular basis.
Okay.
I don't remember whose turn it is.
Go for it, guys.
Alright.
Connect.
What are your favorite kind of characters to portray, to voice, to act?
I play a lot of villains, so I really like when I get to play a hero. It's just because it's different and something new. I got to play a character that I can't talk about right now, but she's not a villain, and I was so very fulfilled after this. I mean, she had a lot of emotional scenes going on. She's got a lot of stuff. She experiences loss. I had to do scenes where I was crying, and man, it's so funny because it's like, I'll be out and be like, oh man, I had to do this really emotional scene and I had to like break down crying. It was awesome. I'm so happy now. Like, it's such a strange like juxtaposition. But it's true. So like, it's really great to like get to go through that. Not that I don't like playing villains, because there's a lot. Villains are fun because they're so confident villains. Yeah. Like all villains, even the ones you wouldn't think, they're all so full of like bon vivance and confidence. They're just like, yeah, you know. So that's enjoyable because it's not necessarily how I see myself, and it's very different from me. But it's also fun to play something that I feel hits more close to home, that's much more like me for a change. So I like that. When I get to play a hero, I'm like kind of like, yeah, I'm going to be a good guy this time. That's right. You take that, bad guy.
Exactly. Face.
Yeah, the power of friendship is going to defeat you. I don't know.
For me, it would be, Nina Williams is probably one of my favorite characters, just because, like, I find, and poor Laura and Julie, because they've already heard this, just because she's quite a complex character, I think, like she's this cold-blooded assassin, and she's super hot, I will also say, but, and yet she has, this relationship with her sister, Anna, that always seems to kind of be a bit of an issue for her, and it's kind of like her kryptonite in a way, in some ways, and then she has a son, so it's kind of like that really flawed, like, I love that very complicated characters. So that would be mine, I think.
I think for me, Laura and I kind of do play a lot of villains, and I really enjoy specific type of villains. I enjoy the villains where you're not sure if they're a villain because there's a purpose to what they're doing. And the thing is, that resonates so much with me. Because personally, in my personal life, I do a lot of activism within the transgender community in terms of media and representation, and a lot of times people are vilified just because they're trying to make their life better. And I see that a lot in villains, a lot in anime specifically, where it's not that they're bad people, it's just they're trying to make their life and the lives of the people that they care about better, and it might not be coming out in the right way, or the story might be told in a different way. And I see that a lot in real life. So when that resonates with me in a character, it really hits close to home, and it just brings a certain level that I don't get to do in other characters.
All right, I think we're actually running out of time here.
I got one last one too. What about you?
Do we have enough time for one more question, or?
I'll allow it.
We'll allow it.
Are there any projects you all are currently working on that you can talk about and tell people to go check out?
Talk about. I've got 2 things coming out this year that I'm really excited about, but can't talk about yet. Sorry. I can't think of anything else.
I'm actually associate director for and it's a live action / anime film that we're working on, and it's going to be a very, very, very cool project called Black Hat. It is a guy from New Jersey, and he really spent a lot of time actually at various cons, kind of getting to know the anime world and everything. And I read the script because he was looking for someone that was really connected to things in Japan, and so I still do a lot of work. Most of my work is still for Japan, the Japanese market, or I work with people in Japan. So he approached me and asked if I would get involved, and then when I read the script, I was like, hells yes, because it really touches on a lot of stuff like bullying and abuse in the home, and there's just a lot of kind of really pertinent issues that a lot of people are dealing with in teenagers nowadays, and yet it's still a comedy in many senses. And so this is a project that I'm like very, very excited about, and I'm hoping. We just did a Kickstarter, and we got a lot of attention from IndieWire, which was really great for our project, but I'm hoping that we start filming like in August, September sometime. We still don't know, but so that's one thing that I can kind of touch on.
Personally, there's a lot currently going on in on-camera work for me. I can't talk about it yet, but it's really exciting, and I hope like there's a point soon that I can talk about stuff that's coming up. Usually we can't talk about stuff that hasn't been released. The one thing I have coming up, which I mentioned earlier, was the new season of Iki Tosen, season 4. I think it's Extreme Executor. I play 2 different characters in it that are kind of the same person, and it's a very, very interesting role, and I really had a lot of fun with it. And even though there's a lot of cheesecake and fan service in the show, I think there's a lot of actual content in the character that I play and in the story itself that I think a lot of people are going to like this season.
Awesome.
All right, very
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been fun.